Hi, everyone. We'll keep it short today, but I have a few things at the top. Okay. First, on the attacks today in Iraq. The United States strongly condemns the barbaric attacks in Iraq today claimed by Daesh, including one in Sadr City that killed scores of civilians and wounded many more. We wish a speedy recovery to the wounded and express condolences to the families of those victims, many of whom were innocent women and children who were in an open market. These cowardly attacks only harden the resolve of Iraqis and the international community to utterly destroy this group and its warped ideology. We are committed to the united and global effort to help Iraqi forces remove Daesh from its territory and suffocate its financial, foreign terrorist fighter and propaganda networks. The recent spate of attacks by Daesh is the latest reminder of the danger this group poses to all Iraqis and the importance of Iraqi leaders from all communities working together to quickly resolve differences so the progress made against Daesh continues. Next, on Yemen, Undersecretary for Political Affairs Thomas Shannon met with UN Special Envoy for Yemen Ismail Oud Sheikh Ahmed in Kuwait to discuss the ongoing UN-mediated Yemen peace talks and how the U.S. can help end the conflict in Yemen and best continue to support a return to a peaceful political transition in Yemen. Undersecretary Shannon met with Yemeni officials and other parties in the negotiation. Undersecretary Shannon underscored the U.S. strong support of the peace talks and the UN Special Envoy's efforts and thanked Kuwaiti Foreign Minister Sheikh Sabah for Kuwait's role in hosting the talks. The Undersecretary welcomed the stated commitment of the parties to continue the cessation of hostilities that began April 10th and which has been broadly holding despite some violations. He also welcomed the incremental progress made on detainee and prisoner issues. Undersecretary Shannon and the UN Special Envoy reaffirmed the need for all parties to continue engaging in the talks in good faith, even while difficult discussions continue, as parties tackle challenges that will return Yemen to a peaceful political transition supported by all communities. Emma?
Since I was late, I will punish myself. I'll defer to either Arshad or Nicola. I do have questions, but...
Can we stay on Shannon? Did he meet with the Houthis?
He met with a variety of Yemeni.
The Houthis?
I'm not going to comment specifically on that. I have no information on that.
With Mr. or former President Abdullah Saleh representatives, did he see any one of them?
So I have no information on who specifically he met with besides the people I mentioned. So he did meet with a broad range of Yemeni officials.
Can you take that question?
If I have anything to add, I will.
Please,
why would he meet with the Houthis, considering that they really are the primary opponent of the government forces? I mean, if you want to talk...
So he was there primarily to meet with the UN mediator. He did meet with Yemeni officials. If we have anything to add, I'll come back to you guys. And since Matt ceded his question, I'll let you guys wrestle it out.
Cher monsieur, it's not his question.
He has postponed his question.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so thank you, Matt and Arshad. Can we start with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? As you know, the French, not me, but the French government is very keen on organizing a meeting later this month in Paris on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Secretary Kerry was in Paris a few days ago. He remains vague about his participation. I think Deputy Secretary Blinken is in Paris today. Have you made your decision about a U.S. participation and at which level?
So we continue to discuss this proposal with the French and other key stakeholders. There has been no decision made yet on whether we can participate on May 30th. However, we are interested in working cooperatively to pursue our shared goal for a two-state solution.
But is it a good thing to organize this kind of meetings and conference?
So Secretary Kerry actually spoke to that. I think he said we welcome all good ideas. We remain concerned about the continued violence on the ground, and we welcome all ideas on moving this forward. On this specific conference, on the May 30th event, no decision's been made on participation.
And what do you think of the fact that neither the Israelis nor the Palestinians would attend this conference?
But we continue to look to both sides, to demonstrate with actions and policies a genuine commitment to a two-state solution. I won't speak specifically about this conference. We haven't made a decision on our own participation yet. So I'd refer you to them to speak to that. Yeah.
Why can't you tell the French that May 30th is a really bad day? It's a national holiday in the United States, and that the secretary won't be there.
Well, we've traveled before on national holidays.
I
I
know.
can't get ahead of that. We just
I
haven't
know
made a
we were in
decision.
Vienna for July 4th in Iran.
You would know, it's true.
But
Yeah.
you said you welcome all good ideas. Do
And
you
that's
think
what the
this is a-
secretary said.
And this is a good idea?
Well,
having
what
this
we're
meeting
saying
on
is we
May
haven't
30th?
made a decision on this particular event.
Why is it
Syed?
so difficult, Elizabeth, to take such a decision?
I'm not saying it was difficult.
It's
I'm just
taking
saying that
time.
decision hasn't been made.
Idea to hold this meeting on May 30th?
So what we would say is that we welcome all good ideas. We haven't made a decision on this.
So you can't say that it is a good idea.
We still remain in consultations with the French and other international partners on it. Saeed,
Not this issue, but on the Palestinian-Israeli
we'll
issue.
stay there.
Okay, the Israelis have imposed a travel ban on the BDS, the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions founder or co-founder, Omar Barghouti. Do you have any comment on that?
So
They're
we've seen
preventing-
the reports. We would refer you to the Israelis for comments.
Yeah, I tell you what, because early last month, there was a conference to counter BDS, a conference that was attended by the American ambassador and so on. And in fact, one of those present giving speeches from the Israeli side basically threatened Mr. Barghouti directly, and he implicitly called that maybe they ought to be targeted and assassinated and so on. You don't find this a bit disturbing that Israel uses whatever tactics to prevent this activism, that is largely peaceful?
So I can't speak to those comments. I haven't seen those specific comments. I know we talked about this conference
Right.
before. I would say as a general principle, we support freedom of movement for Palestinians and permanent residents of Israel.
Okay, because Israel seems to be doing this, against journalists, against activists, and so on. You call them not to sort of.
I don't think
cease and
anyone
desist?
should question
Okay,
the U.S.
I have a
commitment
couple
to
more
freedom of
questions.
expression.
Sorry, I have a couple more questions on Palestinian-Israeli
course.
issues. Also,
Yeah, of course.
So when you say that you, in principle, you support, what was it you said?
It was freedom of movement for Palestinians and permanent residents of Israel
Including Mr. Barghouti.
as a general principle.
Yeah, but you don't have,
I can't speak specifically to this case. For that, I'm going to refer to the Israelis. However, I would say as a general principle, yes.
well, I mean, is this something that you've brought up with the Israelis?
To my
Or is
knowledge,
this
at
only
this-
something that you're responding to Saeed's question with? I mean,
At this stage,
I'm
I
just
don't
trying to
know if
figure
we
out-
raised it with the Israelis.
I'm just trying to figure out if this is an issue that the U.S. is concerned about.
So freedom of movement for Palestinians
Yeah,
and
yeah.
permanent residents is a concern. I don't know if we've raised this specific issue.
Would it be possible to
Yeah,
find
I
out?
can definitely check.
Because, I mean, there's two arguments here. One is from the Israeli perspective that this guy is running a campaign that basically, that they see as a threat. But then there's the other side,
Which is freedom of movement.
right, and you say you oppose the BDS tactics. You don't like boycotts. You think that they're bad. And so the question is, if you basically agree with the Israelis on this,
We support freedom of movement.
yeah, I know,
But
but
let me check
in
and see if
this
we've raised
specific
this
case,
specific case.
Could I follow
Yep.
on demolition?
Yep.
The Israelis yesterday demolished a home in Wallija. It's a village in southern, southern the West Bank, south of the West Bank. Okay, whatever.
I'm
and
sorry,
and
where
they
is
have.
it?
It's called Wallija.
Okay.
It's located in the south part of the West Bank,
Yeah.
and they have ordered to demolish 9 more homes and so on. I wonder if you have any comment on that.
Okay, I'm not aware of those specific reports. However, we're always concerned, as we've said repeatedly from this podium, about demolitions taken by Israeli authorities that continue throughout the West Bank and East Jerusalem. These actions are indicative of a damaging trend of demolition, displacement, and land confiscation, and alongside settlement-related activity and continued construction, continue to undermine the prospects of a two-state solution. We've spoken about this.
Thank you.
Okay, Matt, let's go back to you. I can move around. It's going to be a short one, too.
Well, let's go to Syria for a second.
Sure.
There seems to be a renewed interest from some members of the ISSG, not you, not the United States, and certainly not your allies on the ISSG, to have the UN add at least one of the groups, Ahrar al-Sham, into the list of groups that are not included in the ceasefire. You in the past have opposed such a move, and I'm just wondering if there is anything, there seem to be new allegations that they are pretty much interwoven with Nusra, which is not covered by the ceasefire. And I'm just wondering if there's any revisiting of this position.
There's no change in our position. We do note the reports that Russia's proposed placing, we believe, both opposition groups, Jaish al-Islam and Ahrar al-Sham, on the UN sanctions list that includes ISIL, the al-Qaeda-linked terrorist group. Russia is publicly attempting to designate groups that are parties to the cessation of hostilities. Such actions, we continue to believe, would have damaging consequences to the cessation, just as we are trying to de-escalate the situation on the ground.
But is your position based on just simply trying to preserve the cessation of hostilities, or is your position based on the fact that you think that the Russians are wrong when they say that these two groups are they're woven together with al-Nusra?
Well, we've spoken before, and when you say woven together, you're talking about co-located or the Russian allegation
I think that there's some who say that that they're co-located and they intermingle, but there are others. The more stronger case is that they are allied with or are essentially the same as.
Okay. Well, these are parties to the cessation. So our position on that is that we believe that that they're still covered under the cessation. We disagree with that assessment at this time. We continue to reach out to these opposition groups to ensure that they are adhering to the cessation and continuing to create the environment for a political transition.
Which allegation do you disagree with? That they are allied with or essentially the same as al-Nusra, or that they are?
We are very aware that there's some co-location. We've spoken before about both Russia and our role to try and identify.
Okay, but from your point of view, the Russians are the Russian position is wrong. These guys are not terrorists, and they should continue to be.
At this stage, our position is that they continue to be parties to the cessation. Sure.
On this issue, both Ahrar al-Sham and Jaish al-Islam, they have exactly the same bylaw, almost the same bylaws. They don't have a constitution. They have what they call internal document. They espouse the same dogma. They believe in the same thing. They practice the same practices as Jabhat al-Nusra and as Al-Qaeda. Why shouldn't they be designated as terrorist organizations?
So, we constantly review information.
Right.
We are constantly assessing these groups. At this stage, our position is that these groups are members of the cessation of hostilities. We continue to have dialogue with them. If our position changes, we'll make that assessment then. But we are in constant review of this.
So you're not bothered by the fact that some of their leaders actually, they go from one place to the other and back and forth and so on.
We've talked about the
in leadership
intermingling on the
capacity.
ground. We've
Right.
talked about, especially in areas of Aleppo, where it's very difficult to tease that out. This is one of the commitments that we made when we released the statement with the Russians on Monday, that commitment to try and differentiate. So we are aware of this. As we get more information, as we assess, we continue to look at it.
And I promise my last question on this. You always say that you want to support the secular opposition. There's, according to their statement, there's nothing secular about these groups. In fact, they want, a very strict Islamic caliphate in Syria.
At this stage, they are parties to the cessation. We'll leave it there. Matt, did you have more, or are we moving around? Okay. Yep.
There's this website in Ukraine called Miratvorets. Its header says information for law enforcement authorities and special services about pro-Russian terrorists, separatists, mercenaries, war criminals, and murderers. That website has just published personal data of around 4,000 journalists who are working or worked in eastern Ukraine, their phone numbers and email addresses. These are journalists from all over the world, not only from Russia. But last year, shortly after the website did a similar thing with publishing personal data, a Ukrainian journalist, Alias Buzina, who had expressed pro-Russian views, was murdered. What do you think about this leak of journalists' personal data?
Okay. We're aware of the reports of the hacking of personal information of some reporters who had worked or are working in parts of eastern Ukraine. You know, these are international outlets, some of which are represented in this room. The United States fully supports the fundamental principle of press freedom. Journalists play a critical role, particularly in countries where civil and political rights are fragile and in areas of conflict where the hazards of reporting are their most extreme.
Would
So
you
we
call
are
the
concerned.
hacking? You called it a hacking. Would you
We
call
did
that
call it a
hacking, a criminal, maybe?
I'm not going to make a criminal determination, but we did call it a hacking, and we are concerned.
And it is wrong for them to do that.
We are very concerned about the hacking and the posting of personal information of members of the press who are already on the front lines. Yep.
Yemen, General Assiri is in town this week, the spokesman for the Saudi-led coalition. And he said that if the peace talks fail, that they are going to retake Sana'a.
I saw that. That was Foreign Policy's report.
It was. So, do you have a response to that?
So, you know, we're committed to the peace talks. We're committed to the UN effort. You know, for the Saudis' comment, I'm going to refer you to them.
Is this something that the U.S., as a member of the coalition, would partake in?
So where we are is we're committed to those peace talks. You know, as we said, the cessation is largely holding. You know, the peace talks continue. Under Secretary Shannon met with a mediator today. That's where we're focused.
So the Saudis say that they support the peace talks as well, but if they happen to fail, then they have this Plan B, which is of course a large city with about 2 million people, and it's interwoven with pockets of Houthi support. The U.S. supports the peace process. Would it be supportive of a plan to, retake Sana'a?
I'm going to refer you to the Saudis for those comments, which I just saw. Okay.
Is it not your understanding that the position of the Saudi-led coalition has for a long time been that they have a two-track strategy of a political one, diplomatic talks, and a military one?
So what I would do is not delve into the Saudi strategy. It's not for me to speak to them.
Okay.
Okay.
Is the U.S. a member of the coalition?
Yeah.
We support the Saudi-led
But you're not a
coalition.
member
No, I know, but you're not a member of it.
I
I mean,
don't
you don't have any planning or financing role in it, do you?
No, we support them, I believe, through sharing of information, but I do not believe we're a member of the coalition. If I'm wrong, I'll correct myself.
Are you aware that there may be some arms directly sent to Saudi Arabia for use in this conflict?
For that,
For use in the ongoing
if you're
conflict in
asking
Yemen?
about sort of operational details
Right. No, I'm
and
saying that there
cooperation with the Saudis on that,
Let me ask you, maybe there are some arms that are that go to Saudi Arabia, but they actually are taken immediately to the battlefield, so they go, including cluster bombs, or some say including
Yeah,
cluster
I'm not
bombs.
aware of those reports.
On South China Sea. So yesterday, several times you referenced the international law.
Yep.
And I just wonder within it is a term excessive claims defined?
Yeah. So the United States was among the nations that participated in the UN Conference on the Law of the Sea, which took place from 1973 to 1982 and resulted in the international treaty known as the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. While the United States recognizes the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, I will note we haven't ratified it. The definition is actually in there.
Yeah, so I was wondering, under which specific international law authorized the U.S. to use warship to patrol in the sea?
Okay, so this is freedom of navigation, and we've spoken about this before. If John Kirby was up here, he would use the famous phrase that I told him I would use yesterday, which is, freedom of navigation is not just for whales and icebergs. The United States will continue to exercise that in accordance with international law.
Yeah, but how do you...
I can't speak to penguins, Matt.
Really?
So how do you correlate, with the use of warship to patrol in the sea to the innocent passage?
So this is freedom of navigation. This is allowed under this international convention. So thank you. And, yeah,
Remains is that the United States is not a party to this treaty.
that's
It's
true.
not-
We do
it's-
recognize it, though. But
Well,
you're
yeah,
correct.
but you also recognize, lots of things you can,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean that, that doesn't give you, you don't have any standing to bring or make a determination that means anything on the definitions or what is prohibited inside that treaty unless you're a party to it.
So we believe.
It's like you trying to tell the International Criminal Court who it can or cannot prosecute. You can say all you want to, but it doesn't mean anything.
So we believe, and we've said this before, that our freedom of navigation operations, that challenge maritime claims that are inconsistent with the law of the sea, ours are conducted in accordance with international law and applied even-handedly across the globe.
I don't think anyone's disputing that.
Yeah.
I'm just wanting to make the point is, how is it that you think that you have standing to make a determination that someone's maritime claim is excessive
We believe.
under the definitions provided in a treaty to which you're not a party?
So we believe that our freedom of navigation operations are
Yeah,
consistent.
but that's not what I'm talking about the excessive claim part, not the freedom of navigation.
Yeah.
That doesn't enter into it. What gives the United States the right to make a determination that something is an excessive claim using the definition of a treaty that it's not a party to?
So because we believe that our actions are consistent with the
I'm
international.
not asking you about your actions. I'm
understand.
asking about your determination that other people's claims are excessive and therefore should not be
I'm going to leave it
recognized.
where we were.
All right.
Nike.
A quick follow-up. Yesterday you mentioned the 12 nautical miles for the freedom of navigation. You can take the question if you want. Is the United States identifying the reef as a rock or island?
So
Because
Fiery Cross Reef.
right,
It
because
is
the
a
reason I'm
high
ask-
tide elevation and entitled to a 12 nautical mile territorial sea under international law as reflected in the Law of the Sea Convention. So our ship transited inside the 12 nautical miles of the future in a professional manner, exercising the right of innocent passage consistent with international law.
so that elevation, is that entitled to the territorial sea or not?
It is a high tide elevation and is entitled, and we went through an innocent passage. Okay, thanks, guys. Of course.
Israeli issue.
Yeah.
An Israeli court convicted a 13-year-old Palestinian boy of attempted murder. They have not revealed the sentence yet, but there's also scores of Palestinian children that are in Israel. I wonder if you have any kind of comment, if you're aware of this
Yeah,
issue.
this was the 13-year-old who was involved in the stabbing attack in
Right,
Jerusalem.
Ahmed Saleh Manasra, he was involved in an attempted, I guess, stabbing back in October.
Yeah, we were aware of that report. If you remember, we condemned the attack at the time. We continue to remain deeply concerned about the violence. More broadly, we have an ongoing dialogue with the government of Israel. It's also in our human rights report, talking about minors in prison.
More.
Of course.
Yesterday, you intimated that there would be some kind of looking at or review, you didn't want to use the word investigation, but into what happened with this video, the video of the briefing in question. Have you determined, have you been able
Yeah,
to
we're
figure out
still
what
looking
exactly
into
happened?
it. We continue to take a look at our process at that time, and also making sure that something like that obviously never happens again. I would reiterate video is was always available. It's
Yeah.
back up now on state.gov. We annotated it on our YouTube channel, so it's been resolved, but we do take it seriously and we're looking.
Well, is there any suspicion that you're aware of that this was not it was not simply a glitch, quote
Thanks for
unquote?
the air
Was it-
quotes.
that you-
At,
that you-
at this stage, we believe it was a glitch, but we're double checking and making sure because we have that commitment.
Okay, so do you have any idea how long it will
You know,
take?
to be honest, I think people are talking about it now. As soon as I have an update, I'll come back to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.